Now, do you want your room to appear taller or maybe wider? There's a way to do that, no construction required. All you need is color. And of course, Sharon is back to show us how that works. We know color is like magical, right?
It is magical, Trace, and we talk a lot about how it makes us feel in a room. And just when you walked in, I was like, Tracy, I love that color. It made me feel so happy.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It has such an impact, but it can also be very strategic in how you apply color, and the contrast can really change how you perceive a space. Right. So it can change the shape of the room without changing an inch of wall space. It can feel taller, larger, wider. So it impacts shape and our perception. So I think that's important.
It's all about the perspective, right?
Yes.
So let's start by talking about what would happen if you have a room and you paint everything the same color.
All right. That is pretty common, right? People will paint everything the same color. And what happens in that space, in this space, it's all white.
Yeah.
So you don't look at the barriers in a room. So it kind of feels a little bit more open. When you go with a light color, especially if you have a lot of sunlight coming in, it reflects off lighter colors. So that just naturally happens. And of course, any incandescent and lighting that you have will also reflect off that. So it feels lighter, it feels more spacious, it feels more open. And again, like we've got some dark furniture here, but it's spindly. Your eye can look through it. If you had a big black sofa, it's going to be a very different look.
Yes.
So you want to minimize everything as far as contrast goes.
Beautiful. Okay, now do we have an example of what happens if you just paint one wall?
Yes, and you know what? Just for starters, look what happens when I start painting our accent wall. Your eye goes right there. It gets drawn in. Exactly.
Right.
So when we're talking about accent walls, which we do a lot, when it's a dark color especially, it kind of visually shortens the depth of that room. So suddenly that room feels shorter to you. It's the first impression when you walk in. And so again, your eye is kind of going right to that.
Yeah.
And it can also make it more intimate. I mean, I think when you look at the dining room here, I love how that wall just kind of makes it feel a little bit cozier. And it delineates space. And on that note, I really want to show you this one, Trace, because this is a really cool open concept space.
That is awesome.
Isn't that awesome? Very modern. That dark cube, because it's not even just the one plane of wall. You can sort of see the dark color goes all the way around the side. But it really accentuates the interesting angles of the architecture in the space by painting that. If it was all white, you wouldn't notice that.
Yeah.
So it's strategic. So it does a few things. It makes that big space feel a little bit smaller, a little cozier, the family room. And look at that TV. You probably
so that's what that is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for
it's good. It's camouflage.
Sometimes you want to camouflage it, right? And there's actually a little door there too that you can't even really see. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
So a dark color can really camouflage all those things. So you really want to think about it strategically with as an accent wall. And again, it can do a lot of things for you in that space.
I just like the shape of that wall as well, which is awesome. So what happens when you decide that you're going to paint side walls?
Okay, so the side walls are a little bit different. Like if we paint just one side wall, if we move that accent wall over here, we're going to have a different look, but it kind of feels lopsided.
Yes.
When you paint both walls, like the opposing walls in this space, then you almost get the opposite to that accent wall. So before it was shortening it, but now it's kind of elongating, and our eye is kind of going into the room and up. So you're kind of narrowing the space and adding visual height.
So you do this if maybe you have the lower ceilings and you want to have that sort of thought that it's more airy and tall.
Bring it all up. Exactly, because your eye is only going to look for the contrast. So it's going to see that, so it's going to bring it in and up, which might think, well, why would you want to make a space more narrow? But again, when you see in my dining room here, it does exactly what you said. It kind of brings that space and feels like it goes up forever. And here's another example of using that technique or that method in the space. It's a really pretty bedroom. Got interesting angles in the ceiling. It's probably an attic. But here, by painting the white ceiling and then sort of that area over here, painting that white in that little reading niche, suddenly that space feels very open and light, takes advantage of the light. But again, so we're kind of getting that same idea of bringing our eye up, but still bringing and accentuating the narrowness.
That's gorgeous. And I like the idea of being able to make a space more cozy. I like the coziness. That's what I'm all about. Okay, let's talk about painting the ceiling a contrasting color, because that's the other thing you might want to think about doing if you're having some fun with perspective.
So fifth wall, right? I always call it the fifth wall, the ceiling. Think about it, add color to it, just for fun even, just to bring an impact of color, a pop of color. But when you put a dark color in the space, it actually brings the ceiling down.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
So it can be very cozy. You might think, why would I want my ceiling to be lower? You want to maybe create a more intimate space.
Right.
Like, again, in a dining room, a bedroom.
I'm thinking also a great room. You know,
Yes,
if I had the kind of
exactly.
house that had a great room, they're usually so huge, you might want something to make it feel a little bit more cozy.
A little bit more cozy.
Right?
And actually, you know what, Trace, if you want to grab that
This one?
bedroom. No, this one here, just because
Yeah.
you said that, it reminded me. This is a really great example, too, where the
Yeah.
dark color doesn't have to be so dark on the ceiling, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is just a little bit, it's kind of like the same color as the door.
Yeah.
We kind of brought it up onto the ceiling. So it's just a few shades darker, but it does that, right? Like, it kind of brings the ceiling down. It feels more cozy. Everything sort of blends, so it's still
Yeah.
very open, but absolutely, think about the color that you use, the color choice.
Okay, lower third of a room, because you can also have some fun with that, painting
You can
the
totally
bottom.
have fun with that. And I think that this can also, of course, like everything else, it can be strategic, but this tends to a higher ceiling. It kind of lowers the space, brings
Yeah.
your attention into the, into the living area of the space. And
Yeah.
it also kind of, I think that any kind of horizontal lines always make things feel wider. So this is one other example here, Trace, because you can kind of see how this is a big loft
That's really
conversion.
lovely.
That is a great example of where you can bring a nice accent color. It brings your focus into the space. And again, you still have that light and airy feeling up there, but
Yeah.
you're not focusing on it. You're focusing down into the space.
Just in summation before we go to break, when you see all of the rooms put together with different paint treatments or where you put the paint, you can see it's all the same room and they look all completely different.
Completely different.
So it's all about where you place that paint if you're looking for bigger, smaller, more cozy, all of the things.